Thank you so much for such a generous introduction. The story of that, I practiced now for something like 4 decades, and it has been a kind of slow grind. You're absolutely correct. For the first 20 years, it's a distance run. All the students out here, if you're a sprinter, wrong profession, and you just take your time. And you wake up every morning and go to work. Really? Right? And you try to stay focused on your work. I'm going to start with 2 quotes that have effect on everything I've done, because I'm going to show you work from a very early period, and I'm going to go through and chronologically, and it's going to very much explain the current work. That if you understand the groundwork that was set in my thinking, it'll be very clear what the current work is. I was, in my mind, extremely fortunate to just show up at a particular time in history. And it was the end of the 60s, as I'm a young man, a late teenager going into my 20s. And just a lot of stuff was happening. And it was happening in a political, cultural realm. And it was happening within an artistic realm. And of course, in an artistic realm, it was taking place every place. It was taking place in film, the Godards, the Dutrofeaus, and blah, blah, blah. It was taking place in painting. It was taking place in, not architecture, that'll be another conversation. It was the kind of ending of modernism. It was the exhaustion of kind of a project at the time, which was actually a good thing, because it allowed me to kind of enter a period of time where we're all asking questions and there were no answers. And in the school I went to, I had a very, very interesting character which pushed us in that direction to kind of rethink, etc. And then as I get older, I look back and it gets even more powerful. A series of people are passing away that became part of me. And last year, when Muhammad Ali died, I'm reading all of the articles that are coming out of the paper, and there's this huge amount of stuff. And I'm calling certain friends of mine that are my generation, an Eric Moss or a Stephen Hall, and we're discussing the characters that kind of formed us. And one of them was this boxer. And it seems kind of odd. I'm not going to talk about Derrida or Lacan, or I'm not going to go in a certain direction that you might think that seems to be typical of a lot of architects in terms of I was influenced by certain philosophers, et cetera, et cetera. But there were things around me, and actually, Ali was a philosopher. I'd actually pick him over Lacan, frankly, but that's another conversation. That had huge power over us, and it set us going. And I'm starting this way because as I talk to my sons, they're in their late 20s, we have long discussions about their lack of their broader milieu that's given them a push, and that's given them kind of ideas of who they are in the world and what the possibilities are. And then speaking of possibilities, your whole life, you're going to be told it's impossible. I can guarantee you that. It's happened with me for 4 decades. Everything is impossible. And your job is to say, not true. Anything is possible. And I started off with this quote by Ali, and it's, I just came across it again, and again, it was part of this kind of ritual that took place as he died last year, and it seems to be just so appropriate. Impossible is just a big word thrown around by small men who find it easier to live in the world they've been given than to explore the newer than the power world of change it, the power to change it. Impossible is not a fact, it's an opinion. Impossible is not a declaration, it's a dare. Impossible is potential. Impossible is temporary. Impossible is nothing. And at 19 or 20 years old, I absolutely believed that. And it got me going in life. And that it was completely connected to architecture as an art form. And I'm going to start with that as the beginning of this talk. And then in a very different direction, much more specific to the work itself, everything I'm showing you is interested in some sort of connectivity. And I'm actually at that level a conservative architect in a literal sense. I'm interested in conserving things, but I'm interested in interpreting those things I'm looking at conserving into some contemporary condition. So it's never literal, right? I'm interested in place, I'm interested in context of every sense, in terms of landscape, in terms of urbanism. I'm interested in the context of history, the context of the development of technology, of materiality, et cetera, et cetera. Everything comes from something, right? And again, Duchamp was so clear, and again, this is something that was crossing my mind when I was a kid, as I was reading Duchamp. Man can never expect to start from scratch. He must start from the ready-made things. And even like his mother and father, I thought that was incredibly kind of profound as he adds the last piece. And it's what we are as architects. And it's we're not inventing things from scratch. We're not inventing things that somehow are disconnected. Question mark, I guess. That would be my statement, right? And what I'm going to show you today, everything comes from that notion. So when we started, is that really blown up? Okay, it's okay there. This one looks funny. As Scott said, for 20 years, I drew, worked on small projects, tried to survive in terms of making a living, and tried to establish who I was as an architect. And a huge amount of it was trying to establish a language. Who am I, and how do I express myself within the physical terms of architecture? And it very much developed into a series of ideas that were very much about part whole. So you could say it's a beginning in the Renaissance even, but I was looking at a very different notion of something more fragmented or something more challenging of the unity of the part-whole relationship, and that definitely was starting to, it continued to emphasize part over whole and the autonomy of part. And that was very, very much the continuation of a 20-year kind of research. And the Sixth Street House was very much a part of that. And it kind of culminated in some way as that the building was 10 pieces of a discarded archaeology, and it made up kind of the idea. And then immediately had an effect on all of the work. At this time, it was all smaller scale work, residential and small scale commercial work. And where the parts, the elements, the fragments that made up the total were more and more isolated. And they had to do with the construction of something that was either unfinished or in construction. And again, I was fascinated, I think maybe not, you can correct me, I don't know this school that well yet. I was very much involved in construction. And then I saw architecture as an alignment between the conceptual act and the act of construction, of making, right? And so we were very, very much kind of embedded in that from the very beginning. And pretty much all the work at this time was very much connected to this idea of part whole and the relationship of the elements that make up the total. And then it very quickly in the competitions, because again in this period of time we're doing competitions, which is again I think you're going to find, it's the method of preparing you for much later in life for projects that you have no possibility of achieving in your 30s or even in your own 40s possibly. And we're invited to a competition for the Gedenkbibliothek in Berlin. And now this notion of part whole is having a very, very different kind of direction in terms of an urban strategy where we see things not as a singular project, but as a series of multiple reactions to site conditions that allows us to develop a much more complex kind of notion of an urbanism. And again, the same thing with a competition for a theater in Los Angeles, but now something else is starting to take place. We're starting to get interested in the relationship of ground. And there was a point in this period of time where I was extremely influenced by Raymond Abraham and Pichler in Austria and Gunther Domenic, and then later Lebbeus Woods, and it was very much about the relationship of building ground and very much kind of a primitive operation of digging. And it had a huge amount to do also with the double negative. And when I saw that, it totally changed me as an architect, and I'd never really thought of subtracting digging as an architectural act. I was much more in the Sterling camp of additions, right? And I was much more, the relationship between the building and the ground was much more benign, right? And as it engages it became a very, very different project, and it's going to turn into an ambition before this lecture's over. And then as we did the project for Chiba in Japan, we now were looking more and more at architecture as an act of landscape. We're now modifying ground as much as we are making building. And it's going to be sitting dormant for many, many years. And well, then we did the Crawford House, and we tried to achieve this, but we had a client that wanted a villa, and we wanted to dig the site. And so it's some sort of a hybrid between something that talks about the relationship of documenting a site and something that talks about something much more conventional. But still, the idea had to do with increments of space that are organizing a site and claiming the site in terms of a human occupation. And then we started our first project. And I say first project, meaning something of social, cultural consequence. It's a school, it's a high school in Los Angeles. We were really fortunate to have this kind of unusual client. The little sketch or the computer drawing on the corner was actually what we showed him as the first piece. And it's an augmented landscape. We're looking at shaping ground. And he actually didn't fire us. And we actually came back and got to do it again. And I looked back, and it was totally extraordinary. Couldn't do that today. We couldn't find a client like that today. And then it turns into a technical drawing. And we're also now shifting to 3D. And there's no conversation with you guys, but that's how you all work. But it was starting to change our operations in terms of complexity. That's going to be apparent pretty soon. And we got this thing built. And then simultaneous to that, we won a competition for a building in Austria for a bank, the Hupa Bank. And we're in this between place of drawing and still thinking planimetric and drawing through traditional notion of schematic design development, working drawings, and the computer. And what's happening is, I didn't have the right slide. Can't quite tell, but the computer is starting to develop much more complex forms, which is going to be evident in this project. And we're still now interested in, there's hybrid ideas coming in of land. So we have a very low piece, which is kind of preserving the landscape, right? And maintaining this site at the edge of the city. And then we have an urban piece, which intersects that, and which is somewhat kind of aggressive or somewhat active. And this is for the public. I don't know, you could tell me later. You start getting described now as being, I don't know, tough, deconstructive, whatever. It's just activating the elements. And I've never understood that. That you can have buildings that are very active and very energetic, and you can have buildings that are much softer and have a different kind of mood quality. And for me, I'm totally disinterested in that conversation, right? It's just about the relationship of something that's clearly very dynamic and active, and it's just about in the state of motion. And it's something that I've been fascinated for years. And I will show you other things that don't have these qualities. It's not like it's a given, right? And oh, that's the drawing I wanted. And we're now drawing on a computer, and this changed everything. And that I realized that I could no longer draw anything I was interested in, and it's a priori. So when you draw something, you think it, you know it, you put it down on paper, and in fact, the inventions usually are mistakes or things that are just taking place happenstantially. But with the computer now, we're making connections. And again, all the work I've showed you has to do the relationships of things. I've never been interested in things. I've been interested in the relationship of the things that make new things. And so the computer for us was like made for our kind of direction. And now we could look at things that I couldn't possibly draw. And it changes completely. And then with that, the planimetric disappeared. The plan was no longer the generator, and I was trained classically, plan section, et cetera, right? And the plan was no longer interesting to us. It was interesting, but it was interesting like a CAT scan. It was another way of looking at a project, and I'm still embedded in that, right, the way a section is. But the generating of the project was coming more and more out of the 3D. And then the client hires us again, and we're now getting more and more invested in the relationship of landscape, building, infrastructure, a project in Udine, Italy, and where we're seeing the operation of landscape and building being a singular activity, and in the relationship of infrastructure as a connectivity being part of that, and that's going to kind of sit for a decade before we can come back to that idea. and this layering of a second man-made landscape where you're operating within that, and it allows you to orient and develop a complex, to organize a complex complex, and it has very much to do with the relationship of inside and outside. So the relationship of the public space and the public space in the exterior are connected. And then we're where are we? We're in the late 90s, and we're starting to get a consistency. We're about to get a consistency of work, and the scale's going up. And it was our first kind of large project that we're solo. And I should mention too that because we're interested in building, we want to do all of the work, so we're working solo at this point because it's important for us to do the working documents, because the huge amount of the creativity is within that, and that'd be maybe a discussion one of you would want to bring up later, because I don't see the design being in the early stages schematic. I see it as the complete phase of a project, right? It's everywhere, and it comes all the way through the working. And this was an incredibly challenging project. We won over competition, and it had to do with producing a public space. We were the only one that did that. And we were interested in the very kind of contextual relationship of this and Civic Hall. And we were also starting to think more strategically. The skin comes from a double layer that's protecting a direct west and a direct east facade. And it was our first kind of movement into highly sustainable work, et cetera. And it got us the competition. And the facade was very much a part of infrastructure, and infrastructure represented Caltrans, who are freeway builders, infrastructure builders, et cetera. And we used the human being as kind of building material and made it overt. And then we had something that was very active in the evening. In a city that doesn't have public life, that we're prior to the desiring of public, and we knew that, so the building itself had to kind of energize itself and be very active in its own calling, and it's been really quite successful, because we built the screen as a blotter, really. It's part of a film series at night and blah, blah, blah. And then that led immediately to a project in San Francisco, which is the federal building. And at this time now, we're ingrained, we're integrated in the digital world and in model making, and we're no longer making aestheticized models. And that's another kind of interesting story, because we had the younger people in my office actually resisted it, saying, no, Morphosis makes these beautiful modeling-based models, et cetera. I said, no, that's what we used to do, because that was our product for the first 20 years, right? And now we just need technology that's compatible with the way we work, and we need information. And I'm going to talk about that again several times, because I think it's going to have a huge shift in our educational model. How we work today having to do with what they talk about, big data, right? And all of a sudden, this is a schematic model, and it's completely integrated with MEP and structure and all the kind of huge pragmatics that you'd never find in a schematic. And it has to be, because we have to prove viability to move forward with the project. So we have to prove that this project is buildable to the client. Otherwise, it's not moving forward. So it actually, it's directly connected to your conceptual ambitions. And we came up with this very, very much the second generation of the Caltrans building I'm showing you. Although this one, we're going to take the air conditioning out of the whole building, the first tall building in the United States with air conditioning. And we're really shifting now that performance is becoming a much more powerful part of the office versus design in the formal sense. And we're, I think, getting much more comfortable with design, that we don't have to spend so much time talking about it. It is the office, and there's no reason to over kind of emphasize it. And it's going to be very, very much about making public space and making workspace and making a very, very high performance building. And the language again, the components, the variable systems, the looking for randomness is all now just part of an organizational structure that's pretty much embedded in the office at this point. And the coherency is coming directly from a consistency of these multiple systems that goes all the way back to the first project I showed you at 6th Street. And it's very much about public space, the space on the top, on the 11th floor. San Francisco was filled with best pocket parks, very intimate parks, and we put the one in the building, and ended up being very successful for weddings and blah, 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 etc. We opened up the space for the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, etc. We put the cafe from inside to outside to activate the space, and everything has to do with the performance of the building, environmentally, workforce, and urban. Never once do we talk about the formal notion with the client. It was only talked about the performance. And it's going to be another conversation I'm going to continue. It's super important to us. And then we were starting to get involved. We were looking at Harvard Business Studies, and there's a movement towards more and more non-program meeting spaces, because the discussion now was increasing, attacking balkanization that takes place in huge institutions, and finding more and more places for engagement, for discussion, interaction, connection. And then this notion of skin is becoming now, let's say, we have kind of a team now that's working just with performances. This is a piece that came out of Korea, which I'm not showing you, but it was one of the beginning kind of orientations where we're now looking at much more complex operations of skin. And it artistically came out of a Jim Dine, but we see now the exterior literally as a piece of clothing, and it's operational, and it's clearly defined, and it had definitely an effect on this building. And we were now prepared to kind of work in a very sophisticated way in terms of making this second skin that Primus Lisa built. And it's differentiated. One side, the north, is guiding in light and guiding in wind and protecting against extreme morning and evening light cycles. And the little diagram over there, this building, this single building fully powers, the differentiation in energy powers 600 homes. And then some strange things started happening, that we were getting work through GSA, and no one would have ever believed of all firms that they'd be interested in us. And we showed up at this courthouse, and I had this kind of fascinating client that wasn't like my school client. He took me to the Supreme Court, the Cass-Gilbert, and was convinced that we were going to build something like that. And we had quite a few laughs over that one. And we are going to build the one you're looking at here. And this would be going back to the story of the possible, impossible, where it was probably the first project we had that was so radically political. Conservative, constitutionalist, fixed notion of constitution, working with the farthest end of the opposite on our end. And we were on no possibility. We're going to look at history in any kind of a literal way. And we spent a year, and this is just a series of the models, probably 90, 100 models of looking at kind of potential solutions. And it's one of the kind of most interesting parts of our profession, that you have an opportunity to actually make a stand, to have a voice, to speak about something that has to do with values, and that you can find some sort of resolution, right, between that. It's seems like exactly where we are at this point, or where we're not in this country, right? And architecture is right in the middle of that conversation. And we finally found a kind of way of finding a logic. He was a salmon fisherman, and we used the Zen of fishing as an idea of a certain idea of randomness for us, but organization for him, because he was having a huge hard time understanding our interest in a much complex notion of order. His notion of order was much more kind of specific and kind of literal. And again, as a lawyer or coming through law school, he's trained in jurisprudence, and it's historical. It's going backwards. It's using models in his case, a very literal way. And we went through this whole process of defining another kind of logic that led to this. And at this point, went to Paris, showed him Nouvelle, which completely freaked him out. You know Nouvelle's, the red courthouse, the blue light, and Nouvelle is fabulous. And he got it immediately. And he got not the building, but he got why I took him to Paris, because he looked at me and said, okay, I get it. This is an architect that can really fuck around with the client, right? And he's just doing this, right? Which is, of course, true with Jean Nouvel, right? And it was fantastic. It turned the whole relationship around, and it was the first time he understood that, okay, I get it. architects actually have an opinion. You actually have some power. You're just not following my orders and developing something in a tectonic sense, right? And it was absolutely just incredibly successful in turning the relationships on. Well, and we happen to share a love for Bordeaux, which helped immensely. And then we're in a place now. We were going to document the Constitution and the Bill of Rights in this, and we couldn't quite make this happen. And but we're able to kind of think in a very different way with the digital environment. And we ended up with this, and it has. I could spend an hour just on this project, of course. The steps actually are 271 feet, which is the Supreme Court, and we had a piano nobile. We did a classical, and we go over and over on all the things that absolutely are literal to historical courtrooms, and then we ended up with this. The movement up to the main level. And then the interior, all about connectivity, all about a dynamicism of connectivity. And then you're going to get a peek of a courtroom here, and it's the first time you get an idea of the increment of the courtroom, and you get to the courtroom and you understand the broad notion of the building and the fluid notion, which is nothing more than the connection of these individual courts. And then again, the court, we spend huge amount of time. The seat is Puritan, it's Midwestern, it's absolutely part of the tradition of the 18th century courthouse, etc. It's uncomfortable to some degree. It requires a certain kind of authority, etc. The height of everything. We made a theater where the jury is observing as theater, and they're connected. But we were very kind of clear about that. We separated it. It was a kind of a joke, the guillotine, which came from our trip to Paris and Jean Nouvel, that separates the defense and the prosecution, and then is over the head of the judge, and on and on and on. We put a cross on top of the judge just to make sure we understood the relationship to his interest in Christianity and blah, 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 etc. And it was just a fascinating kind of project. And then I think probably out of our federal courthouse, we won a competition in Paris, and it was a really fascinating project where there was a non-site. And the site was not only kind of a non-site, it had a void through it, which was a connection to Courbevoie University, and had this void in it. It was this incredibly complex thing. And it's where we've always been interested in the idiosyncratic and the specific of every project. I'm trying to make each project as different as they're possible. And the connectivity is the stuff that I'm talking about that has to do with organizational ideas, but the project itself is thought about as unique to that project. And that attitude seemed to work for us for this project, because you couldn't put a generic project on this. And most of the rest of the competitors, and this one had everybody. Literally, it was Foster, and it was Nouvel, and it was Fuchsas, and it was Rem, and et cetera, and they're all trying to put a generic building on the site, and it didn't work. It had to start from scratch and really understand this. And it started from a movement sequence from we're in La Défense, through the Canet, the terminal, and that started kind of an entry sequence. The building is just below the Eiffel Tower, which was a rule of the city, and the competition model, and then a building that's really a cluster of buildings having to do with the resolve of this complex site condition. And it's, again, not planimetric. As you move around the city, it keeps redefining itself. It's continually differentiated, right? Not extruded. Site in the office, next to the arch. And then a very massive interior, 22 stories. And it's in some ways an interiorization of the Eiffel Tower. And then again, the skin, and we're now developing directly from this series of buildings. That's going to be highly performance. It's now moving from east to west. And we have the tools now. We're scripting. We're developing. There's 7,000 components to the skin. We had a team of 3 people work for 2 years. And we're now scripting, and we can tell you every one of those pieces. If you can read that, it'll tell you the maximum condition of its angle in terms of the time of year. And we can rationalize the numbers of pieces through the same kind of processes. And we're building prototypes of the skin and schematic. And again, I think this is going to have a huge amount of difference with education, and that we don't think linear anymore. That we operate micro, macro, and you have to operate that way today. There's no choice, right? And it's, I think also, for a lot of you, your brains work that way. I don't know about, it'd be a one-by-one conversation, but I don't think linearly. Things just come in my brain in certain ways, and it's much more kind of useful in terms of how you use your creativity. Prototype, and then an idea of the lighting of the building, which was going to document, in some ways, a sketch or a notion of the more lyrical kind of aspects, because this building was very different from the federal courthouse, and that we wanted something that was lyrical and was much more suited to the French environment. And then the Cooper Union and idiosyncratic school, idiosyncratic piece of architecture, so it's just do what you do normally, you don't have to worry about it. It's going to be very much about producing an energy to the street, which is communicating the intellectual creative capital of the institution, which is the essence of New York. And it's going to be very much about a collective space. Cooper Union is engineering, art, and architecture, and the notion is for the connectivity of these three disciplines. And we spent a huge amount of time developing this singular interior space that was going to be completely unique to this particular situation, this particular place, in this institution. 11 floors. It's a vertical piazza, if you might. You get off at 2 floors, skips up. You get off at 5, at 8. And those are the places where everybody has their common computer, common lockers, that kind of thing, where they all meet, etc. And the stair and the light and the space is all integral. And then, of course, the stair, which becomes the social space, and which becomes part of an exterior-interior kind of operation, and was very much mimetic of the New York Library, or the Met, etc. Oh, and then we're going to, what happened here? Oh, we're going to go someplace else. Okay. A lot of these ideas, you have to wait a decade, 15 years, for an opportunity to come to continue an idea. Because I'm going to go back now to the school and some of the early competitions we're doing, including Japan and the Chiba project. And we got an opportunity to do a piece of work in Shanghai, and it's a research institute. And it's going to take me back to some other things. Before I get to that, we've now kind of really rethinking how we design. And this is a model, and the sections are CAT scans, and we're moving like that, right? We set it up at night, and I'm looking at 50 sections, and we're operating within much more complex language, and then I can connect conceptual or perceptual. I can crawl in it and look at it and evaluate it, right? And it's a completely different mode again, which is just allowing us to do things that we could never kind of imagine doing them, and doing them at a speed which is 2 or 3 times faster. And I have an office that's about half the size, right? Because it's an extremely efficient mode, right? And I am trying to draw again. And the drawings are now computer drawings, but they're operated somewhat by hand, and they represent systems of order and layering that I'm continuing interested in. They go way back to the drawings of the Crawford House. And are they square on the thing? Are they square? I can't, my computer, it's a rectangle. Okay. That's not square. Is it? No. It's supposed to be square. I don't know what's going on here, but you're going to fix it for me? Is that it? Because on this, it's really funny. On this computer, it's square. On this one, it's a huge rectangle. And I'm looking at combinatory behavior between multiple systems, and I need the freedom of, they're all square, pretend they're square. and I'm working on three-dimensional models that I can now operate within computer technology that I couldn't make. They were as limited to the technology. And I'm looking for, these are all options of 4 systems, subsystems, an XY line, a Z line, an object, and a surface, and they're identical. And I'm seeing how these 4 simple systems, the number of variation of elements I get, systems of variation, because each of these are identical. And so here I'm looking at 3 of them and I'm putting them together. And now I'm going to show you the drawings and I'm going to show you a plan of this project that's still abstracted within the same drawing technique, let's say, just to make the actual literal kind of leap. I don't really work this way. I made this slide for you, right? I do this, I don't have to do this, it's happening in my brain. I'm doing this because I'm talking to you. And then it's getting systematized as we look at architecture, and it's layered, and it's becoming more architectonic, and it's starting to connect into various functionalities and technical kind of requirements, et cetera. And then it's becoming much more disciplined as I look at the systems now, and I organize them within an architectural framework that includes all the functionalities that finally turns into a plan. This is 500 meters across. It's a small village. It's a research institute for this giant company in Shanghai. And it's going to be about ground operation, about ground augmentation, and that it's all about a manipulated landscape with this one piece that kind of extends out. And again, in model. And again, we take total control of our project at some point. The structure, we're proving it can be done. We're modeling it, et cetera. And again, it's natural with the systems we use today. You're integrating everything. Again, I would go back in terms of the relationship of education today, that all of you can do this, that you immediately kind of understand how it's made. And if you understand how it's made, there's no reason to go forward. And you can't expect someone else to figure out your problem. You have to be able to solve that. Elon Musk doesn't go out and find someone that can make the vision of a car that has his specifications. He figures it out, right? And that's what you have to do. And then to give you an idea of somehow the scale of the kind of operation on the upper piece. And then here we are kind of putting it together. And again, now we have the systems that can make complex elements, right? And the shape language is just expanding, right? It used to be quite simple, and it's getting broader. And out of that came this, kind of a healthy cantilever, 120 feet. I was worried the building was getting a little too soft. They were kind of giving up on architecture. It's all landscape, so it had to have some counterpoint. It'd be the reverse of silence and music. It'd be, I don't know, it'd be something else. It's Miles Davis. It'd be something that has strength within a kind of a softer kind of fabric. But everything you're looking at is building. The landscape is building. Whoop. And I'm bringing the country and the urban together. And of course, with landscape, you have these incredible kind of possibilities. It's dynamic, right? And you have this complete changing with seasons. And again, the decisions now are becoming less and less made consciously. These are just taking place with the combination of these systems. And I'm making discretionary moves, go here, go there, but I'm not preconceiving them, I'm not drawing them. They're happening more or less by chance. Oh, by the way, the professors here and the architects, you couldn't do that in this country in a million years. The purpose of this piece is to connect the two halves of the campus, conceptual. There's nothing in it. It's connecting it over the highway. And when the client asked me what it was for, I said it's about connecting the campus. You said fine, right? Couldn't happen here. Not impossible, right? That'd be a whole other discussion. The opportunities today are not in this country. We have the architecture kind of perilous politics for me. We're just bogged down, and we're just not interested in innovation. And we have a lot of the most innovative people when you get to the Musks and the Steve Jobs and those kind of character, but in the broad sense of things, they're just not interested in innovation. It's a real, I have to say, as architects, we really can look at the world in political, social, cultural terms, and you get a snapshot of what's taking place. And then clearly, one of the things you see is there's some sort of a fear of any kind of exploration at the moment, and it's really strange. I have to say, it's way, way different than it was when I started. A lot of the projects I started with, I could have never gotten done here because clients are getting more and more conservative. And this would be absolutely impossible. And in China, it's the opposite. If it hasn't been done, I've learned even how to answer questions. In China, they say if it's been done before, I know exactly what the answer is. Of course not. I'm doing it for you. In this country, if they ask the same question, of course it's been done. It's been tested. We're okay, okay? And unfortunate condition. And everywhere there's a connection between the human being and landscape. And so it's perceptual. And these elements keep finding new kind of resolutions, including public space. It's a small village, you might say. And then again, parts of exterior, which are going to connect to the interior, the food facility, cafeteria, kind of the entry to the hotel, the main meeting space, which is in that snout, which is in the piece oversending. And then again, you're always connected to the water. And so here you're seeing the rowing boats as you sit in the conference room, as you go through, and there's this constant kind of interaction of the world. Whoop. The Earth plate is lifting slightly from the ground, as we made it, right? And so we can document it. I don't know where the noise came from. And then, again, at one end, part of the recreation facility. And then this is starting to affect all the current work. The first kind of an idea sketch that I'm working over something of the Dallas Museum of Science and Environment. And we're starting with landscape, and we're going to construct the site. It's a kind of an odd non-site, very LA-ish on the other side of the freeway. And we're going to start with constructing the site, and again, we're going to kind of rationalize that, and it's going to turn into a plan. And it's going to be very pragmatic, and it's also going to increase the amount of ground floor where everything wants to be. So it's going to work very programmatically. And again, we're working in model only, and we always have hundreds and hundreds of models as we work our way through. And again, it's now turning it into a kind of a complete package, and we end up with this. The kind of main entrance off a courtyard, the site, and its resolution of landscape, where we repeated the landscape that was the historical condition of the site prior to urbanization. Again, fragments of skin and building and landscape and earthscape. The beginning of an entry sequence. You're looking up, we have one large vertical connecting space of the stacked galleries. It's a vertical stacking of galleries, which is quite complicated to make work in terms of perception. And this is a 200-foot high kind of space. Oh, God. Anybody can help me on that one too. You can turn it down, I appreciate it. And then you're entering and moving up the sequence. And as you move up, you're connected to the city. And it's directly connected to its urban environment through vision, not through placement, right? Very kind of an American, the site isn't logical in terms of traditional public space, and I guess I'm interested in that relationship of its connection to the city. As you're moving up in this space, and you get to the top, and you're connected to the city. So you're at least perceptually connected, visually. And then these elements keep taking different forms as it has to do with landscape. And so we have the skin, and the skin here came directly from an idea of geology. It was part of the natural environment that they have an exhibit on, actually, and now we're producing randomness. And again, you've seen all the work already, and now it's much more kind of intentional as we're producing a series of random conditions. Random, a complex organization that has the differentiation that you would find in natural stratification. And we're able to do it. And now we take charge of making these things, because they said it couldn't be done, of course. It was impossible, and we say it's absolutely possible, we'll do it for you. And so we made the systems. We went to Gates' largest contract, come on, Mayne, concrete contractor in the United States. My person is the woman in the blue. We're laying out prototypes, and we're taking charge of kind of how to make this thing and install it, et cetera. And we're making it incredibly inexpensively. We made this thing for $50 a foot. That allowed us to put some money in the building and other places, and we figured out how to make it somewhat more complex in a complex language of curving, et cetera. And what happened to this one, again, it was a marker, and another change in our studio is that this is an advertisement in in architectural record. It came out 6 months before the building's done. They're selling our product. And again, for your students, if you get smart, you're making products today, right? That's where your future is, right? And because my wife was kidding me, she's an MBA, and said, of course you have a, what do you call it, what do you have the rights to sell something? A patent. And she knew, of course, I didn't have a patent. And, but it's really fascinating, because I think at this moment of time, again, starting with the digital and with the BIM and all the kind of stuff that's going on, we're moving more and more into construction. So for me, it's taking me back to the houses, because we built all the houses. It's the same thing. And it's really, really interesting. And it also opens up opportunities for many more students. Not all of you have the same interests or talents or right, preconditions. And it makes it for a much more vital office of people that have very, very different interests. And then again, in a project in LA for the Emerson School, it's going to be really obvious to you at this point, the conditions of the stasis of the box, the active element in the interior, which are all the administrative and classrooms. The edges are dormitories. A school in Boston that's coming to LA became really interesting, and giving them a very Los Angeles, Sunset Boulevard. So it's a perfect kind of juxtaposition between Boston. I've lived in Boston, the literal conservatism in one place, to the Sunset Boulevard, which is kind of the symbol of Los Angeles, and the cacophony of this. This could only come from Los Angeles or Miami, I believe. And then everything was about condensed urban space between. They were trying to find a hybrid between the urbanism of Boston and the relationship of LA. And you're looking at the Hollywood sign. We had a perfect site. It couldn't have been better. And then the other way, you're looking at the horizontal city in which you can't see, or the airplanes coming in the airport. And so it's an absolutely perfect site for this project. And again, we're using a stair as a social space and the connective glue. And everything is going to be space between. And it's going to be purposely somewhat random and found. And then this circuitous element. And again, now we have an operation that this becomes just, it's natural. It's completely part of the studio. And we're, from the beginning, we're constructing it. In this case, we're working with Bill Zahner in Kansas City, and we're giving him the first set of drawings. He's continuing with them. We're literally working together with Bill. And there we are in the studio. We're building the first prototypes. And it ended up that the most efficient way is to make big elements, right, that are singular. And it's made more like a Boeing 737 than it is like most buildings. And it was, again, very kind of economical. This is, by the way, all the buildings I'm showing you are absolute medium or low, inexpensive buildings. I've never done a building that I had a budget on yet. I'm waiting for one, if there's anybody out there. And then the skin, which also has an abstract, very complex kind of organization. And here we are, we're taking a 4x8 sheet of aluminum, and we're responsible for the shaping and the efficiency of the piece that meets the budget, so I can use every piece and throw away nothing, et cetera, et cetera. So it's combining a conceptual idea with an incredible pragmatic to make it happen, and we're showing them, we're mapping it where it goes on the building. So these are the maps that show which pieces go where, and we gave to the crew that makes it. And then a recent building at Cornell, again, a lot of the same stuff here. The skin, all of them are exploring different kind of ideas, kind of a singular, there are only 2 modern buildings on campus now, and this is for their computer sciences, and it's a Gates Hall, and they demanded, which in Cornell is kind of unusual, an image of a modern building, which we're not easily asked for. And it was kind of a strange project that way, but other than that, kind of very simple. And again, it's going to connect to the ground. Oh, how do I get rid of that? What do I click? I don't have a mouse. I don't have an arrow. I don't have anything. Thank you. And again, all of them now are going to have certain notions of these ideas. They're going to connect to the ground in a very particular way. And in this case, we're disguising columns because we couldn't afford to cantilever it. And so we want the sense to be something that's being supported by the ground, but has kind of the power of the cantilever. And we're using the relationship of the site and this beautiful stone and the relationship to the valley that is the edge of the campus as part of that. And it's also giving a sense of scale and kind of weight and solidity that I'm interested in. And then an interior that becomes an extension of the exterior as part of the connective tissue. And then we're going to do a series of towers that are happening right now. And I'm starting to end it now. These will all be projects that are in process. And we got a project in Shenzhen, China, for a 350-meter tower. And it's going to touch the ground in a certain way, and it's going to have a certain kind of urban position to the ground. It's going to open up to a large commercial space and a public space. And as it moves up, it's going to keep changing. And like the far tower, it's going to be differentiated at every floor. So as they move up, it's continually changing. And at the same time, as you can see, the lifts are separated from the building. You walk across a 15-meter bridge from the lift to the building, right? It's the tallest removed lift in the world, and it's the tallest steel building in China. And again, it keeps changing. And then what it is here is increment. You can see is the movement block and the office block, the connective tissue. And then it becomes the increment, right, as it grows. And the commercial space entry and the office space entry, looking through the void of these bridges, looking out of the bridge to the city. It goes up to 73 floors. You get this incredible kind of view of the city. There it is a couple months ago under construction. You can see the lift and looking through it. There it is last week. Again. And something I snapped at, I think I'm at about the 40th floor. And as you move through, you're constantly getting these kind of views. I'm now up maybe at the 60th floor, but you're immediately in the city as you leave. You're in the city and then back into your work environment, etc. You're always connected to the nature of the larger urban environment. And then again, another kind of very simple little project we're doing in Casablanca, Morocco, and we use this as an idea for the client in that there's still a kind of a tripartite idea for a tall building, base, shaft, top, and we kind of took a joke and kind of flipped it and said we're going to just put two tops in the middle, and the middle, of course, is the economic engine, and the top is the urban, and the bottom is the gesture to the city at a working level, and we're building this. And again, a certain complexity of floor plan is differentiated. It's just coming out of the, oh, there it is. Just coming out of the ground. And this is another one that's really interesting. And again, it'd be different, maybe the students versus faculty, architects. It's kind of a complex building structurally. You can see the size of tubes here. These are 1.5 meter tubes, big, right? I've shown this to various people in this country. I have to joke with them so I'm not kicked out of the room. If I think they're going to build something like this, they're going, right? And I'm going, okay, I know this is something I can do for somebody else. I can't do it for you. But then in the end, I prefer not to work for them, frankly. I'd rather work here. But it's really fascinating what's going on in the world right now. And I'm showing you building in Shenzhen, and in Korea, and in Shanghai, in Casablanca. I went there for my honeymoon for 35 years ago. And it seemed like a second, third world country. And they have no problem with this whatsoever. This is the first building of their La Défense. They're building a new commercial district outside of Casablanca. And it's just startling at a cultural level. And then we won this competition last year of this really crazy building. Do I have a pointer here? Oh, let me see. It's right. You see a little tiny thing right there? Little bar? You see it? That's the building. And we were just pummeled in the press for winning this. It's 400 meters, tallest building in Europe. It's in the Swiss Alps in Valls, where the Therm is, Zumthor. And we were pummeled for putting this huge office skyscraper in this site. And we've changed a bit. And again, this would be a broader conversation. And then I think what's happening, I think it's maybe with a lot of you guys, it's already you guys, meaning the students, that it's maybe more normal, that you have to become much more strategical today and decide when you want to talk design and when you want to talk broader interests that connect to a particular client group, right? And you can't possibly think about talking about design. Absurd. There's nobody that has any interest, really. The number of people are just minimal, right? And a lot of times when I have very aggressive clients that are trying to push me and have very strong opinions about something, I give them my really, really kind of funny kindergarten test, and I say, Mies, Korb, or Kahn? And they look at me blank. And I said, I just named Garrick and Mickey Mantle and Babe Ruth. So obviously you're not interested in baseball, right? And you have to actually separate, meaning you should not be discussing design in many cases, because there's nobody interested. It's keep it within your friends and your office and within your professional work. And if you think about it, it's no different if you were a astrophysicist or a environmental biologist. Really, we work on complex terms and we work on complex cultural terms that the world isn't savvy to, and it's gotten less savvy because any education in the arts has disappeared. Certainly in my generation, there's nobody, intelligent people that go to top schools are not invested in art. It's just not who we are as a culture. And this became really interesting because we built this model purposely to deal with the high-rise building and saying, no, this building is infinite. And so when the press came, they were all ready to torture us. We killed them. They were all ready to say we built this monster building, and this is the model we had in our opening, and they literally couldn't say anything. We took the argument away, right? Because in this context, it's an absolutely minimal piece of work. And here it is on the site. Totally crazy project. It's 18 meters wide. It's going to be really fun. We're still in the design phase. And then a project in Korea, another research center for the Cologne group in Korea. This is a big, big building. It's 250 meters long. And it's going to has this huge space. If you see the section, that's a 400-foot long space. This really incredible kind of interest space, and we mapped it on Notre Dame to get an idea, kind of the scale, the relationship of that space and Notre Dame. And again, kind of a section as it's being developed in the skin. And again, we're working with this notion of layering and clothing, and this is their product. So we're directly connecting to their product, and we're using a lot of their fabrics. They make kind of high-tech fabrics. And we're again looking at a highly developed performance building. Where is the person that asked me to do this? Yes, here it is. That's for you. You were saying you're doing prototypes this year in your studio? And here we are in the shop, and we're making a prototype of one of the connections at 1/5 scale. And because again, even in Korea in this case, they were struggling to figure out how to make this. It's carbon fiber, and it's a fairly complex piece. And so here we are now in a shop in Korea, making the molds and making the first prototypes. And this is the prototype they made on 2 floors that we're now testing it on the building. And it's going to be this, and we're making some changes right now before it goes in the building. And again, kind of pushing the state-of-the-art of technology. And then the last project is a very, very large project. We're doing the headquarters for Eni, which is Eni, the petroleum company in San Donato in Italy. And we're starting with an idea, again, of land and the stratification of land. And it's going to be very, very much about a building and a landscape that comes together. And then it's very much about the urban condition that the leader of Eni in the 40s was very, very visionary and was interested in modernist city planning. And we spent a huge amount of time studying the nature of this whole community, all of which is San Donato, which is part of the largest corporation in Italy in this case. And then out of that came a very kind of particular kind of orientation of this complex. And we won the competition because we were the only one that even had a public space. We made a series of piazzas, and all of the others were towers and et cetera, kind of object buildings. And then we spent some time locating the main kind of buildings that represent this campus that ended up with this. And again, I assume at this point that I shouldn't have to say much, that it's fairly obvious that these things are now developed out of the research we've done over the last X amount of years. And they represent an interest in a certain kind of complexity, a connection between landscape architecture, infrastructure, et cetera. And again, the skin, we're working this idea now of that's somewhat similar to, or it's parallel to Dallas, and then we're using the notion of stratification. And in this case, it had a lot to do with even winning the competition. We showed them a stratification where oil is part of it. We discussed the nature of the biologic location of oil as one of these pieces, and it's their business, right? That this is what they do. They extract, right, this thing from, and we gave them this kind of study, and then out of that came this piece. And then the last thing I can't show you is the biggest project we have. We're doing a campus in Beirut for the U.S. Embassy. It's a huge, huge project. It's over a kilometer and a half long. But what I thought would be really interesting, again, for you students, is that what I can show you is an abstraction, but an abstraction that comes out of the working drawings. And when we started looking at doing this set of drawings, they're all coming out of the working documents. And I can show them because there's no way I'm revealing anything about the building that I can't reveal. But what I became fascinated is they're returning to the organizing sketch that are now actually the drawings, because it's a continuous flow. There's no change. The lines keep moving and just keep changing as you keep adding performances and complexities. But you can still find the initial organizing sketches at the end of the project. And I think with that one, I'm going to call it a day. Can I add one little postscript? It'd be lecture 2. What I didn't do, I'm spending actually most of my time in urban design and all my teaching time at the Now Institute, and we're only doing urban policy. And this is a project we just finished, a competition that we just won in China again, in Henan, and it's an island. And we're looking at performances in terms of landscape and in terms of built environment and in terms of infrastructure. And I'm just going to say that what I didn't talk about that has huge influence in everything I've showed you has been the urban work, which is more and more kind of pushed us into broader arguments that have to do with the relationship of our work within political, cultural, environmental, urbanistic terms that are moving it towards a foundation where we can develop arguments. None of them have anything to do with the formal. I'll end with that. Thank you so much. Of course.
So we'll open up for questions. I think you should explain the now stuff a little bit more.
Do what?
The now, the urban stuff you're doing with UCLA. I mean, because it's part of your work at UCLA, right?
Yeah, that's all I'm doing.
It's combining with practice and with the professionals.
Yeah, I've you know how I talk. I don't want to sound like I'm a critique all the time. All right. I've decided I'm not interested in teaching architecture anymore, and then it's kind of redundant that there's many good people teaching, and that the schools are more or less embedded in architecture. And I'm also sensing that there's a kind of an end at a certain formal level, and maybe it's just I'm 74 and maybe I'm just worn out. I don't know. But it's we've invested a lot of time in shape making, and we're starting some work right now, which is going to be a little different than some of this work, and that because this is just coming naturally at this point, we don't spend a lot of time focusing on it. We're focusing on other things. And so in my academic work for the last 10 years, I started the Now Institute 11 years ago, and we started with a study of Los Angeles, and it seemed to kind of take off. And we've been doing a series of urban studies, and then we were asked by the Brad Pitt Initiative to do the Float House in New Orleans, and We're in Haiti right now. We're building a water infrastructure system. And we worked with Culture Now with the President's Committee of Art and Humanities, the ex-President Obama I'm talking about, of course. And we're doing more, we're heading up a study at UCLA for looking at making Los Angeles energy neutral in 2050, which has become really interesting. And it's really been fascinating for me. I find architects, students of architecture, architects, are really lousy at making arguments. They're just not good at it. And I'm probably the worst example because I started that way, that I never wanted to talk about my work. There's nothing to talk about. I've drawn it, I've done it, it's what it is. I said everything I wanted to say on the work. There's no reason to talk about it. And by the way, I still feel that way. I talk because it'd be kind of boring if I just sit there and said nothing for an hour, I guess, right? But honestly, what I'm really interested in aesthetically, I have nothing to talk about. I've shown it, it's like poetry. You read E. Cummings, you read his famous as a father, there's nothing, you read it and it says something to you or it doesn't. There's nothing to talk about, right? You're done. And I'm still convinced, in fact, I'm getting more so that way. And so I try to talk around it and give you an idea of what I'm interested in and where the thinking is, and that's all I can do. With the urban work, you actually have to make an argument. You have to make a clear argument, and it's established in terms that people can, an intelligent person, we use as our model a mayor. This should be given to a mayor of reasonable intelligence, and it operates at that level. And for the Grand Challenge, it was really fascinating because we spent 2 years on it, and we made a study of what it takes to actually understand the problem of making a city of 10 million sustainable in 35 years. And it's fascinating. It takes you in a completely different direction. And it's definitely affected the work because it's the big ideas now. We're thinking more and more micro, macro, and we're looking at the implications of what it makes to make architecture within a macro scale, within an urban scale, within a regional scale, et cetera. And then with that, two other factors that really started the whole thing. One was I was really tired of being treated as a professor as, you teach architecture, and again, mostly in this country, definitely not in Europe, it's like a negative with the working world. And I learned to stay quiet. You don't want to talk about that. Oh, you're kind of, whatever, you're thinking out here, you're kind of weird or something, or you're not realistic, right? And then it goes back to me with Ali. I'll say, fuck you. What do you mean realistic? Your realism sucks, right? That's what the problem is, right? If you made it, it's a fantasy, your realism. Unfortunately, the fantasy is more or less our reality right now, but that's another complicated conversation. I wanted to produce, and I was getting results from certain projects we did that were urban as student work. I teach at UCLA. If I'm in biology, if I'm in engineering, if I'm in medicine, it's not student work. It's called research. It runs the university. It makes hundreds of millions of dollars every year doing research. And they're researchers. They're you. At 20, you're not going to get any smarter. You are who you are. You're going to get more knowledgeable and get more experience, right? In art, in the art world, you're a kid. You're a student. And it really just got me. And so I decided I wanted to form an institute. The school supported me, and so I have an institute that they give me money, and I have a staff and that kind of thing. And I want to produce work that's at the level of serious work, as if it came out of your office, right? So when something comes out of the office, it's not student work. And then I had to train my students. Oh, by the way, 2 o'clock is 2 o'clock. Because again, my theory is, when I'm going to a jury, you can't be too late. If you try a half an hour, it's still not going. It's a different world. And in my office, if I'm late for a meeting, a client, 3 minutes, once I can do that. After that, I've lost a client. You cannot be 3 minutes late, right? I've got 8 people at the table, right? Each making $500 an hour. Doesn't work, right? And so I had to retrain my students. You're not students anymore. I'm not the professor. We're actually trying to solve a problem, right? And we're all trying to do something, and we have different responsibilities. And then I set up the studio differently. I have a project manager, much more like my office. I put some of my office in it, so there's more professionals working. It's just not all young kids that need more experience. And I'm interested in producing what I think schools of architecture, we should be producing serious work that affects our thinking urbanistically, environmentally, sustainability, et cetera, products, et cetera. And I think we shouldn't accept the fact that we're the status quo, that we're kids. They just do kind of interesting work that's not relevant. It should absolutely be relevant. That had a huge amount of me kind of getting interested in this. I had somebody in LA that supported me, that gave me some seed money to get it going. And then with that came a very different kind of professional environment. We behave differently, we act differently. And I still haven't got it working. I need more money because I need more senior people, like in the office. You can't get 11 young people with 2 experienced people. You need a gradient still, and I haven't quite worked that out yet. It's put a lot of pressure on a few of us to get the work out at the level we have to get out. And then it also puts a standard on the work. It's not like one of you can do okay and another not okay and another really great. It's a product that we put out, and it has to operate in a comprehensive way, right? And it has to be a serious piece of work. So there's no gradation, right? A good person and a bad person. We're all working on a project that it's like something coming out of your office. It doesn't come out of, if it doesn't achieve a certain level, it doesn't come out of the office. Period. That's the rule, right? And it operates in a little tougher terms. And I think, and I see this. I speak personally. I'm not talking to other people. We've been kind of lazy. I think our educational system is way too soft, and it's got to get tougher, and it's going to be good for you. And then with that notion, I see my perception is the problems of this century are going to be infrastructural and urban, not architectural. There will always be good architects, and we always need good architects. But I think they're not going to be the most compelling problems. The most compelling problems are clearly going to be the sustainability, and I mean in economic and social and cultural as well as environmental terms of our cities. And they're already, today's New York Times, anybody read the sinking 5 inches to 9 inches a year in Mexico City? I had to read that 3 times. That's like, it's kind of a lot, right? And the problems are so overwhelming right now in terms of our urban environment, and it's startling to me how nobody's looking at them. Nobody. It's really crazy. So all of a sudden, in Mexico, a big chunk of it is going to kind of fall in, and they already lost a kid. The cracks are so big, a kid falls through, right? And it's amazing to me that we have NASA's. We could put a person on the moon. What was that, 30 years ago, 40 years ago? And there's nobody actually looking at these problems until they become catastrophic. And again, if you travel around the world, and if you're in Bangkok, and if you're in Shanghai or Beijing, we could go on, right? They're just startling, right? And anyway, I'm interested in getting more people, and I'm connecting now to people at MIT and at Harvard. I work with Charles Waldheim at Harvard and with and we're going back and forth. And I think many more of you are going to be. That's going to be a very vibrant territory, and that we need more people that are interested in broader issues, right? That are beyond the aesthetic. Because the aesthetic is covered. We have many, many schools that deal with the aesthetic part of architecture. And they're not incompatible. So I can bounce back and forth, and some of you might be the same, right? Yeah. Can you hear him? I couldn't hear you. Come on up here.
Speak up a little bit, or maybe,
What?
Big data and data mining, new challenges.
augmented reality, data mining, what are the opportunities for architects?
Augmented reality.
Virtual reality.
Virtual
Yeah,
virtual space maybe? I'm just the wrong person to talk to. Interesting, it's not my territory. If I had to make just a hunch, it actually substantiates physical reality, makes it even more important. In today's world of increased virtual connection, the stasis, the physicality, the place becomes actually more and not less important. It differentiates. Like I'd say the same thing with human interaction. As we increase, all of us today, I probably spend, 80% of my time communicating through text and emails and voice. It makes real connection even more valuable, I think. In fact, we run New York, LA office, and so I do a lot of video comm and stuff. And when we actually meet, whether it's ritualistic, it's an important event. Yeah, we have chances to do things that we can't do. It makes it even more important. Two different things. The found is I steal everything that I can observe. Anything in my field of vision, I appropriate in a way that I find useful. And so the beginning of a project, it'll be found in terms of everything belonging to that project, anything having to do with the circumstance, the site, any condition connected to it. I'm interested in using some part of that and interpreting it. And then architecturally, I'm looking less now than I was 10 years ago. I'm just looking at things that other people do, and I swipe them and rework them, and it's appropriated. It's like language. It's mimetic. And I reconstruct it. But it's not, I'm not sure I invent anything. I invent the way it's constructed and the way the combinatory behavior, the connection of things. But everything comes from something. Absolutely like language. And then every once in a while, the language you actually do it through hybridization or something. You do invent a word, or you push a word, or more likely, in my case, I make a sentence, and I can construct a sentence in a different way by altering the positions of things, etc. The randomness is a whole other thing. I'm interested in, it's not really a good word. I'm interested in complex organization, which would be connected to today biological thinking of that are not simple systems that use repetition and simple increments, etc. But they have to do with much more complex relationships. And the drawings, the last drawings, are the kind of clearest way I could show that. And that had come from 2 or 3 years ago. And, but it's going to be much more parallel. I'm looking, like those drawings we're trying to explore, and the 3D models, I'm trying to explore the extremes of organization. Because I ask people when they see them, are they random? And they say, no, they're organized. How are they organized? I don't know. Meaning they are organized, but they don't know how they're organized. Right? And so I'm looking at the extreme of something that's coherent, because basically architects, we make things coherent, essentially. You just strip it down, right? And I'm looking for pushing the notion of coherent past the classical thinking and past maybe the compositional thinking of the moderns. And these are getting less and less compositional. And they're random in the fact that you're putting systems together and discriminating, but it doesn't matter. Like I could have talked about the Giant Project. I could draw 15 plans, all different. I don't even care. Or if I care, I'll tell you. I'm not linked to any one plan. And now there's a whole nother discussion that in today's world, the reality of program changes so quickly, you need very fluid systems to move things around, and you can't be locked into things have to be here, right? It doesn't work. And in the Giant Project represents maybe the most sophisticated I've been able to do, that you could keep changing the program, and I'm totally okay with it. I can just keep moving the systems around, and it doesn't matter, really. Or if it does, I am using certain classical notions of what I see, and I'll step in. And but they're fluid. And as an operational strategy to me, it's really important.
So you mentioned that you're interested in relationships and a lot of organizations and different health systems. I was wondering what you think maybe in the next 50 to 100 years, what types of new maybe systems are going to be in architecture and cities or this type of
Well, the islands I showed you, I'm finding that the interest in complex organizational systems, which are looking at diversity and looking at, it seems like we're very limited in the systems we use for city planning. The grid, the line, axle, biaxial, they're just incredibly limited. And I'm looking for more complex systems which are actually emblematic of the found historical city. I'm doing a series of, I've got a guy in my office now doing a series of studies, and we're looking at Rome, Tokyo. We're looking at a series of cities and looking at their growth over time, and we're looking for the accidental properties that we're trying to mimic but organize. And so in the drawings I'm showing you, I'm trying to organize that randomness, but organize in a way that I can somehow control it, but you're between controlling and not controlling. So it's willfulness and chance. It's just balance between those two things. And it seems to operate more at the large scale than it does the small scale. And it's a beginning of a formal operational strategy. I gave that project to my Now Institute last year, and I'm now expanded it to Penn. And it's funny, you're really quick at getting the formal. Just like that, they all got it. I just looked at the schemes and they just, boom, they had it, just like that. The next part, translating it into what they are, stadiums, housing, hotels, infrastructure, was a little more complicated. But it gave them a way of seeing the project and entering the project in a very different way than through the logic of rationale of what a metro system is, what a road system is, what a hotel is, et cetera. And it just challenged you. Like in that one, it had to be a whole other conversation. It starts to challenge you of just thinking about the project in very different ways, and you're coming at it from the formal organizational side versus from the pragmatic performance side. That helps. The future, I don't believe in the future. I believe in the present. We can't, the future was a kind of really interesting 50s, 60s idea as a concept. It died, I don't know, decades ago, I think. We can't keep up with the present. Read the paper. Look who our president is. I mean, come on. I mean, honestly, it's the world. If there's a dilemma in the world, we have the world has reached a place where the level of complexity is beyond most people's ability to grasp it. Would be my sense. That if we collapse as a civilization, or we collapse as a globe, it'll be because we've lost the ability to even understand the nature of how the world operates. And I would say what's happening in this country politically right now represents that. That is to most people's disinterest of what's happening, but they don't have the capacity to understand it. It'd be like talking to when we worked with the astrophysics building, I don't think I showed it to you. I'm working with 8 astrophysicists. Every one of them is a Nobel Peace Prize. You can't understand what they're saying. They're talking in tongues. And that's what they operate. They operate with a formula this long, and they'll look at it and find it so they'll use the word beautiful, and you have no idea what they're talking about. And they text back and forth to people like Hawkins every day, and it's that. If that makes any sense, that we're at a place where the world has gotten more complex than our capacity to understand it. That goes back to the Now Institute too. I think we need more people that are interested in the broader kind of issues of how we form very complex organizations like cities.
I've got a question about how you actually get some of the great public projects done here in the States. I assume these are probably going to like the lowest bidder contractor. How do you put something out there that they've never seen before and actually get like a bid that they could like?
No, it's funny with contractors, builders. No, it's funny. I found it's been repeated since our little projects from the very beginning. And I didn't show. I could have shown a whole series of furniture and small projects. From the very beginning, they were interested in things that haven't been done before. I mean, that's what we do. There's a resistance in the beginning, but once you pass the first resistance and get them involved in it, I find it's just the opposite. That they're very, very willing, etc. And in that framework for Cooper Union, it was a subcontractor that makes stuff out of GFRC and GFRP, etc. And or fiberglass, and he'll do an ionic column for a casino. in Vegas or something. It doesn't matter. Just make stuff, right? And we did this one. It was actually quite complicated because there are quite a few pieces and they're kind of intricate to making this thing. And I had a person in my office, a woman that I'd recruited for the AA that had worked with Peter Cook. She worked for a year with him, designing it, and then we built it. Natalia Traviso was her name. And a year, and when we finished it, and we had to go through all kinds of experiments, did you see one of the steel pieces coming through? It's steel, and then it's clad, etc. And it was a piece of work, and it had to kind of fit in a certain way, and there was a lot of coordinative issues involved. When he was done with it, he was incredibly proud of it. He was like, he looked at it as a piece of sculpture. And I remember coming there on a Sunday when I was in New York and walking the building, and he showed up with his family, a big extended family, and he brought his family there. That happens to us all the time. And finally, they get involved in it. The Korean guys pushed a little bit on that piece, but that was really complex. And then all of a sudden, they take control of it, and then it's really funny. They're going to be better than you are. And then they play this, oh, we're going to move it past what you've done it. Now we're going to really make something serious out of this, because we know what we're doing. And and it's fantastic. And it starts with the right client. Is not the contractor, that somebody that trusts you to take responsibility for it, because it is your responsibility. It's going to work, and it's going to work with a given budget, and it's going to work under all the performances it has to work in, so you are taking kind of risk. But I guess that's another territory that come with the first quote, with the impossible. Architects are not, on the whole, risk takers. And no risk, no gain. Like lifting weights, playing basketball. Just real simple. You can't get it both. If you want to make certain accomplishments, there's no choice. You got to take a shot at it, and you got to take a risk for it, and there will be times you fall down. And there'll be times that you suffer financially or whatever it is, and that's just part of the game. Again, that depends on personalities. People will go in different directions and kind of what you want to do. And it's the same about making a living. Frank Gehry to me has been a very important person, but much more as a practicing architect than like a lot of, I ask students, and they go, oh no, I'm not interested in Frank. And they mean formally? And I go, no, guys, I'm not asking you that. I'm asking you as an architect. He makes a living. He does buildings that he likes to do. He gets good commissions. He actually makes a living, like a real living. Allows him to be generous, allows him to do things. And I'm going, no, I'm interested in that. And I've been lucky growing up in LA and kind of watching him. And risk-taking. And the most pragmatic man you'll ever meet. I don't know a more pragmatic architect than Frank. Absolutely incredibly pragmatic. He'll know what he pays for errors and omissions, and he'll fight for it and go to Washington and have the fee and prove to them he's working in a way that he doesn't want to pay that money. And again, that's one of the things that all you're headed for. Conceptual, left-right, right-left. Part of your world is insanely pragmatic, working with the contractor and keeping your office open and making a living, and part of it is in your dream world, right? It's your visionary world.
Is there a project that you didn't get that really haunts you or stands out? And how often are you in a situation where you have to say no to a project? Like, for instance, if you were asked to design the presidential library for our current president.
No way.
Could you talk a little bit about
that? Came up. Funny, that came up with the Bush, baby Bush.
Right.
When we were discussing the office, and I wrote a person that got the project a kind of a note that I thought was quite funny, and I said, "Oh, what a great project! A presidential library with one book." And then I quickly wrote him another note going, "Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot the Second Testament too." And of course, you'd make choices. I've never worked for a developer, never done a condominium. I don't want to get into that, but this sounds it sounds somehow ethical and better than thou, and it's up to you. I do what I want to do and what I'm interested in doing, and there's no prototype for that at all. Losing jobs, I would say the 5 most important jobs I've done, I didn't get billed. Everything, I didn't get the fire tower, it just died. The Chiba didn't happen. I could go right through. The things that I really, really wanted, I didn't get. But don't get everything you want. It doesn't work that way. You get some and don't get some, and you don't want to whine about it. It's just, you do what you can do. And no, but that part, That's a tough choice here. Your first job is probably the most significant thing you can do in your life. It sets you going. And in architecture, a little bit like a lot of the world, you move in a certain direction, it's really hard to get out of that. It's a teeny profession at a design level. Everybody knows everybody. And you're going to decide that what you want to make a contribution for. And I'm definitely not a person that's going to tell you a small office, don't go corporate. Absolutely not say that. CIARC's become kind of a school that's kind of radical. It's known as kind of radical architects and anti-corporate and all that, and I never agreed with that. And I always give them bun shaft at the library at Yale. Go look at the library. Doesn't matter who you work for, be it a corporate or an individual, nonsense. Just look at the work and look at it. Can be done in any number of combinations. And today, most of you will be in a bigger framework, because that's just what the profession is. I don't know what the percentage is it 80%, 85%? It's pretty big, right? And I think it's also, I don't know, I assume you talk to amongst yourselves. It's a real different world than it was. I was coming to be in the 70s. I had opportunities that you don't have. Different world. I could do things, and there was a different spirit in the world. And the characters I was mentioning that I came under, there was a different kind of sensibility in the 70s still, right? And you have to find the currency of the moment, right? And that's your job. And I don't even have a feeling for that, because that's not where I'm at in my life. I don't have to do that. I don't have to worry how I'm going to start. I have to worry how I finish. Yeah.
In reference to your thinking, what percentage of your designs are composed based off of intention versus based off of accident?
On a what versus what?
Like intention versus accident, like how you come about the design choice.
I've kind of never worked a priori. Like certain people, I'm trying to think who you would be aware of. Like a Michael Graves would draw plan section elevation a day, 2 days, a week, hand it to you. Next project. I've never done that. Sometimes it starts with a hunch, a drawing, but usually it's a conversation. What's the project about? Where are we going? All right? What are the opportunities in this particular project that we want to explore? And what does it have to do before there's any a priori notion? And that's changed a little bit as I get older, because I just got a lot of stuff rattling around in my head, things that haven't been built and just floating around, so I can this quickly kind of put something down. But that's not the way I want to work anyway. Through the false solution, the popper, you put something down, challenge it, change it, put it down again, change it. I got that actually at Columbia with Stephen Hall and a jury years and years ago. And it just clicked with me that that's exactly how I work. It makes sense? You put a solution down, but it's a false solution. It's just something to get the conversation started, and you attack it. And most of our work changes quite radically, although it's both. Because again, I'm speaking more 10 years or 20 years ago maybe. That it's probably a little more stuff coming forward now, just because you have your own baggage, maybe. But the attempt is to keep challenging it. And definitely very seldom is it a priori, that it doesn't change significantly.
So maybe one more question. What you did, yeah. Well, at the beginning of your talk, you talked about the relationship of the parts of the whole, and then it seemed to grow and develop into the relationship between architecture and the city, or architecture and landscape. What I was just wondering is, do you think that the concept is still important? How do you avoid sameness in the work?
How do you avoid what?
Sameness.
Sameness. You tell me. You're aware of it. You're attempting to differentiate it based on your identification of its uniqueness. You're limited by certain typologies. So when the buildings get big, the tall one, quite simple. And it kind of merges on the ground, and very, very simple project. I have more time in a residence I'm doing now than I do on that tower, probably 3 times as much time. I'm not really disturbed by sameness, in that I don't think you have to come up with uniqueness in this, maybe the sense you're talking about. I'm actually interested in uniqueness as an idea that it does have context and that it belongs to something. I would ask you, I just showed you a third or a quarter amount of the work I've done in my life, and whether it in fact represents a variety or a uniqueness. I took a few things out that I actually put in there for that question. We did housing in Madrid, and it's orthogonal, and it's an organizational idea that comes from the Marrakesh and Tangiers and Tehran, and it has a very different look and technology. And I show that saying, no, I'm not married to any language, etc. It had to do with the demands of a project in social terms and in urban terms and in constructional terms. Again, I would turn it back to you, and you tell me that if.
Maybe sameness, if we just look at Duchamp and the ready-made, maybe the concept can be ready-made. Maybe sameness is okay, and maybe everything doesn't have to be idiosyncratic.
For somebody else, not me. But again, let's put it another way. I find it the source of my creativity, where I have something to discuss, because I'm looking for the. If you have a strategy, and the strategy is going to be more self-similar, the way you think, right? Or it's developing within that way. And that the differences have to do with different questions that come up that have to do with radically different projects. And that's what keeps me kind of alive. Because instead of doing another one, I'm going, no, this seems to be a very different, like the little thin tower. We won the competition, they built, it's a hotel. They had all these schemes, and we decided that all of them were way too big for this little 700-person village, right? And we finally decided we needed something just absolutely minimal, and the height was irrelevant, and it came out of a dialogue. And now we're changing the skin, and I'm making it kind of a Core-10 rod and shifting it instead of being glass because it's too generic for me. And but it came out of a discussion that makes it totally unique, and it makes it unique in this place. And it seems like there's always information available to give you some level of differentiation. Where it probably doesn't happen is when we start moving too quickly, because now there are projects we're leaning on, and we just haven't investigated them as thoroughly. So it'd be more our problem that we just haven't had the time. We have either too much work, or we're working beyond our capacity to operate at a certain level, which is a huge pressure right now to keep alive. We're already facing that fact that we have too much work, and we're cutting back, and we're shrinking the office because we feel we're a little out of control. Really difficult problem today, pragmatically, right?
So, Tom, thank you so much. For the students, are you up for go in the studio for a few minutes and what time?
Yeah.
So for the students, we're going to have a kind of continue this conversation up in the hammock in a few minutes. So, thank you so much for a great lecture, a great conversation. Tom.
Yeah.